So let me introduce Michael Law, executive editor of The New Yorker and author of very important book. This book, very big book, Strangers
It reads fast.
Strangers in the Land.
Yeah.
Michael, I just noticed this book, this title, Strangers in the Land, is not you come up with this. It's not, average person says that. It's from a Supreme Court case. It's from the Supreme Court judge's decision in 1889.
Right.
So it's official. It's officially how Chinese are perceived in this society back then.
Yeah, totally. The background of the title of the book, oftentimes when you first set out on a book, you kind of pencil in a tentative title that it goes out and it's kind of part of the promotion of the announcement of the deal of the book. And Strangers in the Land actually is the title that I had always had in mind and had been stuck through the whole process. As you mentioned, it comes from a Supreme Court ruling that upheld one of the Chinese exclusion laws. Like one kind of important thing to know is that people know the, quote, Chinese Exclusion Act, but it was actually a series of laws that were kind of increasingly onerous from 1882 onward until the law became permanent in the early 20th century, and the justice was referring to the Chinese in this derogatory way of calling them, they were strangers in the land who couldn't assimilate with us, essentially, the white population in America, it just kind of stuck with me. One interesting note is actually there was an early letter that some early Chinese arrivals in San Francisco wrote to the newspaper, and in which they actually called themselves strangers in the land, which is an interesting
so
thing.
They call themselves
that
strangers.
They recognized that they were, strangers in the land. But I just thought that it was a really powerful title and speaks to what I was trying to do in the book, which is, the book is about the Chinese in America, but I really intended it. I wrote it in a particular moment, in a moment that we're experiencing right now, where a lot of different, not the Chinese particularly, but other people are being treated and targeted as strangers in the land. And it's not just the story of the Chinese in America, but it's the story of any number of other immigrant groups in America.
And it's also not only the story of the past, it may be also the stories of the present, too.
Yeah, that is part of, I set out to write this book in a very particular moment. The origin of the book was the spring of 2021. This was in the pandemic. We were experiencing that surge in violence against Asian Americans. The Atlanta spa attacks had just happened, and I wrote a piece for The New Yorker that drew in a couple of books that touch on this history, and kind of wrote about how this kind of history of anti-Asian violence. And I wrote this book. There have been many good books, I should be clear, written about Chinese immigration and Chinese Americans. The closest analog probably is Iris Chang, who wrote the famous book, The Rape of Nanking. In the early 2000s, wrote a book called The Chinese in America. I had actually never heard of it until I wrote that piece for The New Yorker, which is sad, I think. As people might know, she committed suicide actually shortly after this book came out, and part of it might have been because she had just absorbed so much tragedy. And but the thing that's I think that I was trying to do in the book that's a little different is Iris Chang's book it's a much more kind of sweeping kind of look at the Chinese in America, and it goes up to present day. I really wanted to tell the story of exclusion. I wanted to tell the story of what happens when tens of thousands of people who speak a different language, look different, don't fit into the existing hierarchy, racial kind of stratification of the country, and how does how did our country react in that moment? Because yes, I do think that there are lessons for today.
Sure. Some of the stories in the book, in your book, like about those who first come to west of America to have this gold rush during the gold rush and to build the railroads. You know, a lot of these stories we know it. You know, through the movies, the cowboy western movies, but there is a lot of details. You know, we are not familiar. But this image you portrayed in this book really correlated with the image we saw on the movie. It's like Chinese, when they came to America, they are quiet, they were hardworking, and they are willing to take whatever comes without protest. They just endure whatever happens to them. Mostly in this case, in your book. Yeah. So do you think is a trait, it's a culture trait, or it's a way to survive?
Okay, well, first of all, I really appreciate how you've talked about how it kind of came to life for you, because that really is what I think I bring. I'm not a historian by training. I'm a journalist. I write for the New Yorker and previously the New York Times, and I was trying to make an argument in the book, but really I was trying to tell a story. And I think what the reviews of the book, which have been incredibly gratifying, what they've kind of universally taken note of is the way that I've kind of brought to life particular characters, and which is hard. It's a little bit, you really have to work hard to find those kind of details that can bring these Chinese voices to life, because the reality is our archives, our historical archives, oftentimes Chinese voices are very difficult to find.
Because they're quiet,
well,
right?
I mean, history is written by the powerful,
yes.
And the marginalized are often left out of history. But if you look hard and you're very intentional about it, you can find it. In terms of the kind of endurance part of it, the resilience part of it, the one thing I'll say is, yes, there's a lot of, I don't know, I speak Mandarin, so I won't say this in Cantonese, but there's a lot of chirku, obviously. There's a lot of endurance in it. In terms of like the quiet part, I mean, the thing, I guess the thing I would say is like there are things that might defy that stereotype. I mean, one thing that's just really notable, for example, is the Chinese were very sophisticated and active in using the legal system. You know, when Chinese exclusion laws were passed and they were administered arbitrarily and in a racist manner, you know, specifically it was meant that to ban Chinese laborers, but it was immigration customs officials who were handling immigration to the point took it upon themselves to basically try to be as difficult as possible for all Chinese immigrants, and they had to find ways around that, and they filed habeas corpus petitions, and to the point that it was like kind of overrunning the court system in San Francisco, thousands of these, and to the credit of these federal judges who they took seriously their obligation under the law. It's another kind of resonance to the current moment. They, you know, had to wade through these cases. You know, there was also, I mean, there were, maybe we'll talk about some of these cases, but obviously people know about Wong Kim Ark and that famous case, but there are other less well-known cases, like in the town of Eureka, which is one of these towns in the West that drove out the Chinese. They actually sued the city of Eureka for damages. It was like a early class action lawsuit. The case kind of petered out in the courts, but it was just pretty incredible to me that they filed this lawsuit. One final thing I'll just say about the quiet thing. You mentioned the railroads. There was actually a very, kind of incredible incident where the Chinese laborers were pressing for higher wages and for better working conditions, and up and down the line they went on strike, and it was the largest labor action of its kind that was up to that point in history. This was the early days of the labor movement, and so that's an extraordinary statement about defiance, I think.
Yeah, but the strike you mentioned, they stopped it, after they were threatened. They never thought to fight back.
You're totally right. Like the thing that so there was negotiations, and they did succeed in winning certain concessions, and then they just went back to work.
Yeah.
And the leaders of the railroad actually kind of years later kind of marveled at this. They kind of just kind of praised the kind of orderly fashion in which they returned to work.
Yeah, and you mentioned some case they push back, and I found it's extraordinary in your book. Usually Chinese Americans, they are quiet, they just endure whatever happens to them. But when they fight back, when they push back, they succeed. Maybe being quiet, being obedient is a survival way in China, but in America, if you fight back, you got a chance to survive, you got a chance to succeed. There is a very famous case is in 1898, the Wong Kim Ark case, and it's very relevant to today. It's about the birthright, right?
Yeah,
citizen
totally.
birthright.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully people are familiar with it. The thing that's so Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco, the son of a shopkeeper. We know a little bit about, like, he was kind of born above the store, and he went back to China multiple times, and at each time he would get these affidavits attesting, because you needed white witnesses to attest to your citizenship. So they would say, I remember, Wong Kim Ark's family, and I know he was born in the United States. He came back with these affidavits, but the customs inspector in San Francisco and the Justice Department were kind of intent on creating a test case to challenge the clause in the 14th Amendment that if you're born in the United States that you are a citizen. There was a guy named George Collins who was kind of like this kooky, eccentric lawyer, is the way I read it, who was floating a legal theory that because the 14th Amendment has this clause that says something along the lines of if you were born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, you are a citizen. They were challenging that clause, that they were trying to argue that Chinese, even if you're born in the United States, they were ultimately loyal to the Empire of China, and so they were not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So the Justice Department and immigration officials kind of together decided they were going to create this test case to challenge this. And the remarkable thing is, thanks to the 6 companies, this group of mutual aid associations that had come together to defend the Chinese, they hired this extraordinary team of lawyers, like the kind of most famous lawyers in New York, and took it all the way to the Supreme Court and won. The thing that's less well known about Wong Kim Ark that I talk about in the book is his problems with immigration didn't end actually after this. He's like this. Even back then he was famous. This Supreme Court case, but he wound up in El Paso, Texas, there was a Chinese community in El Paso, and he was going back and forth across the border, and there's this famous kind of notorious Chinese inspector who arrested him. It seems like he knew who he was, but just seems like he was intending to kind of hassle him, and he held him for a bit, and then I think Wong Kim Ark had to pay some sort of bail or something like that, and in the end was released. The sad thing is he had sons back in China who were American citizens by derivative citizenship. You know, if you're the son of an American citizen, you are an American citizen as well. And they came back, they tried to come into the United States, and this was by then Angel Island, which is a famous place now where mostly Chinese immigrants were held and interrogated, and all of his sons who came in were hassled and detained for long periods of time. One of them was actually sent back, and the kind of the melancholy way that I end the chapter on Wong Kim Ark is you actually see through the years, because his photograph in his immigration file, this kind of mugshot of him, you can see them over the course of decades, and you kind of see the I don't know, it's a hard life that he lived, and he eventually went back to China and died there, and I kind of think of him as a man without a country, and you just kind of see in those images the melancholiness of his
And in
life.
your book, there is many Chinese who came to America and end up, there's men without country, right?
That's a recurring theme.
Yeah, and also there is a successful story, a Chinese father who want to send his daughters to the public school, and when he was rejected, he decided to say no to this kind of rejection. The Jew tape in 1884 want to fight his daughter's right to stay in the U.S. public school. Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this is a very famous story of Joe Tape and his wife Mary and their daughter Mammy, and so they lived. They're a fascinating couple. Joe Tape. His name in Cantonese was Joe Dip, and he had made it westernized, and he called himself Joe Tape. He had a hauling business, and then he ended up marrying this woman. Her name was Mary McGladry. She was an orphan that had been taken in this lady's home, and she didn't speak any Chinese because she was, taken into this home, and they raised her speaking English. The couple, they courted in English. They had a Western marriage, wedding at this church, and they lived outside of the Chinese Quarter, outside of Chinatown, and the children, their classmates were, their playmates were all white. And they didn't want to go to school down in Chinatown because it was far, and so they wanted to go to their neighborhood school. And the principal and the school district of San Francisco didn't want them to, and barred them from attending the school. And they sued and actually won the case. But what happened was. Mammy didn't get to go to that school down the street. What San Francisco did was they created a separate Oriental school that she had to go to, and so it was not nearby actually, and so it's actually an extraordinary story. That family has this kind of extraordinary multi-generational story. May Nye, the great Columbia history professor, wrote this great book about the Tape family. I highly recommend it.
So under the backdrop of so many injustice, so many hardship that Chinese experience in America, when you fight back, you really really have a chance to live a little bit better, to be successful in one another. There is another case I just want to briefly mention that there is a Chinese man in 1876. He defended his home against a white intruder,
Right.
and was found and killed this person and was found not guilty. So when I read this kind of story, I really feel inspiring. It's like any ethnicity, in the United States, any rights you need to fight for it. You cannot just wait, someone, to give you this kind of right.
Yeah. No, that you mentioned that case that was in actually in Humboldt County in Eureka, and it was just in I don't know much about that case. It was because it was just a few articles in a newspaper, the Humboldt newspaper. And it was mentioned in my book because it preceded this driving out that happened in Eureka.
Yeah.
And it was funny that you mentioned that because that was it was ended in a hung jury, I think, initially, and then he was acquitted. But the thing is, it was a little repetitive in the book because, I would write. There are many horrifying things that happen in the book. The Chinese massacre that happened in Los Angeles in 1871, which is one of the worst mass lynchings in American history. There were all these.
And in 1885, Rock Spring Massacre, 29 Chinese were killed.
Yeah, and there was this kind of recurring thing. These horrific murders and massacres would happen, and the people would be acquitted, and it was actually a concern for me writing-wise because it's repetitive. But the thing that's interesting, for example, the Chinese massacre in Los Angeles in 1871. A group of people, defendants, were in the end convicted, not of murder but of manslaughter. But then years later, they were released on a technicality, and then there were other cases where people were pardoned and charges were dropped. So the record is very mixed.
Yeah, but in the Rock Spring Massacre, in 1885, 29 Chinese people were killed, but none of the mob were punished for any degree. It's kind of astonishing.
Yeah, because that was in a grand jury that was drawn from that surrounding county, and there was never, almost the entire town really took part in this, and so the sheriff did arrest a large group of people. But they were almost kind of celebrated. It was like a celebration when they were kind of marched to jail and they were given all these privileges, and a grand jury declined to indict them. One of the reasons is no white resident would agree to testify against them, and there was there was confusion about whether they tried to get any Chinese witnesses to testify. The prosecutor insisted that they had asked the Chinese legation, as they call it, the diplomatic legation, for help in that, but they never heard from the prosecutor's office. So I think that they didn't try particularly hard.
Yeah. So this happens in all the driving out period. Tell us, what is the driving out? I believe a lot of people are not familiar with this word.
Yeah, I didn't know this. So basically, what the lead up to, it was actually a several decade lead up to the passage of the first Chinese exclusion law, and what really turned that from a West Coast issue to a national issue. Well, for one thing I'll say is economics was a big part of it. There was a deep depression. They called it the Great Depression before the 1930s Great Depression. That left many thousands of white working men, as they called them, out of work in San Francisco and elsewhere in the West Coast. And so there was this kind of growing labor-driven movement to to exclude the Chinese. And then the country was very evenly divided politically between Republicans and Democrats. Sounds familiar to today. And so this was the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, which had freed the slaves. And so how did the Republican Party, which stood for these values of liberty and equality, how did they become just as vociferous in denouncing Chinese immigrants as the Democrats, who were, remember, their stronghold was in the South. They they were kind of vanquishing Reconstruction and kind of throwing that off at that point. It was because, like, both of these parties, in a very craven political way, were searching for some sort of political advantage, and they were going to get that from the West Coast. So that was California, Nevada, and Washington. And the way to win those votes was to demagogue and scapegoat the Chinese. And so that led to the first Chinese exclusion law. What happened is that Chinese found ways around the law. It did not shut off immigration. Chinese found, in some cases, in many cases probably, under false pretenses, found ways to enter the country. They found ways to evade these racist laws that were designed to keep them out. And residents in these communities in the American West just got frustrated. And they were frustrated at the lawmakers. They were frustrated at the judges who were actually allowing, people in, and they took matters into their own hands. And so 1885, 1886, there were nearly 200 communities in the American West, as I think 168, I think, is the number that Beth Lou Williams, a professor at Princeton, came up with. That expelled the Chinese from their community. The Rock Springs Massacre was part of this. It started in Eureka, and then there was this kind of interregnum period, and the Rock Springs Massacre was kind of like this dam breaking, and it just kind of accelerated. So yeah, I think, I'm a pretty educated person and conscious of my identity as a Chinese American, as an Asian American, but I didn't know this history until I started to explore it. I don't know, it's funny, I have a 16-year-old daughter who is taking AP US History this year, A-Push, as they call it, high school students. And so her teacher, she's at Bronx Science, her teacher recommended a book, like a kind of a course book, like that's kind of an overview of AP US History. And so she got it in the mail. It's this really thick thing, and I flipped through it. I looked to the index to see if how many mentions of Chinese there were. There's only one mention of Chinese. It was about the Chinese Exclusion Act. It actually got it slightly wrong. Like it said that that it excluded all Chinese immigrants. It was mainly targeting Chinese laborers, and there were exceptions. But there's nothing about the driving out, nothing about Wong Kim Ark, nothing about the railroad. There's nothing else in there. So yeah, it's Asian American history is American history, and that's why
Is this the goal you read this book?
I mean, it is definitely one of the goals, and but the thing about the book is, I appreciate everyone being here. I always, I think Asian Americans, struggle with this feeling of invisibility. And it's not a contest of who has experienced like worse kind of privation, like Black Americans or Asian Americans or Latinos or indigenous people. But I think what Asian Americans feel is just a lack of their stories being told, and this lack of acknowledgement. And I've always wanted the book to not just be about, I would like you to buy the book because it's important for my publisher for it to be commercially successful, but I think it's part of a cause. And the beautiful thing that I've felt in some of the events is my book launch was at the Museum of Chinese America with Minjin Li, and I've done events around the country, particularly San Francisco was a really special place. Just feeling that emotion and energy in the room just for the desire for these stories to be told. That's incredibly powerful.
Because it's our history.
Yes.
Yeah, it deserve to be heard. Just now you mentioned when the economic is not good, particularly, the treatment towards Chinese are getting worse. But I think it's. Think the other way, that one of the main reasons Chinese immigrants were driven out was that they work harder, more efficiently, and they pay less. They work long hours.
Yeah.
So making them more competitive than the white counterparts.
Yeah.
But they're coming from a totally different culture.
Yeah.
So they hardworking, people don't see them as to serve for the local interest. Can we say it's just a part of human nature? It happens nowadays, right? The anti-immigrant sentiment, why we don't like immigrants here?
Right.
Because they take our job.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things that are really important to note about that is now in the decades later, it's actually possible to kind of, incredibly, the group of economists actually did some retrospective studies that looked at, after the passage of Chinese exclusion, did it actually lead to higher wages for white workers? Did it kind of benefit, white workers economically? And they found that it didn't. And actually, a lot of the kind of synergies that existed when you had Chinese workers and white workers in the same factory were lost, and as a result, there wasn't actually more job opportunities, and it didn't actually lead to increase in wages. And there's also been studies that found that actually the Chinese and white workers were actually largely not competing for the same jobs, that they were in kind of different kinds of labor pools, that the Chinese were in the kind of lesser skilled sort of labor pools. And I think that's really important because we're experiencing that kind of question in this current moment. I think there's a lot of misplaced anger towards, particularly Latino immigrants at this point. And I think it's just really easy to look for a target.
Yeah, because it really reminds me, there is one word in the Bible that there is nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah.
Everything happens before it happens again.
Yeah, Mark Twain is credited with the saying that I think that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Although he might not have actually said that, but it might be apocryphal. But I think I'm a big believer that writing about the current moment, it's really important to be able to apply context from the past.
But also this anti-immigrant sentiment, especially anti-Asian, it's. I'm thinking, when I read the book, I'm thinking, is this part of real human nature? Like in Chinese, there is an old saying, 非我族类，其心必异. It's like who are not of our kind, surely don't harbor different hearts. So either way, each human being was basically, we have a lot of evil things in our heart.
Yeah, no, I think one of the takeaways is very simple. I think difference is hard for us. I'm a reporter, and I did a story years ago, like at the beginning of my career, about Asian American churches who were trying to become integrated. Like they were Korean or Chinese speaking, and then they're second generation, they're English speaking, and these churches then want to, have a multi-ethnic, multi-racial congregation, and they were struggling. It was hard. And one of the takeaways from that piece was that difference is hard. Difference is hard in our churches. Difference is hard in our friend groups, in our companies, in our democracy. It takes...
Especially for Chinese, for Asian, we look differently. It's like different from black people, from Irish, we look totally different.
Yeah.
Our culture is totally different.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just human nature. It's human nature because, yes, there is the racial difference, there is the language that is just, one of the funny, maybe it's not exactly amusing, but one of the striking things when you read, you can read letters from gold rush miners who interacted with Chinese for the first time, and when they write home and talk about the way they saw these Chinese, not necessarily in a overt, it might not necessarily even be in a hostile manner, but clearly, yes, these were strangers.
The other.
Yeah.
Actually, everyone here know Chinese Exclusion Act, but we don't know it lasted so long. Actually, it actually ended in 1960. It officially ended in 1943, but actually the real effect ends by 1965.
Yeah, exactly. So the book runs from the gold rush to the 1960s when my parents came to America. Originally, when I set out to write the book, I thought it'd be more narrow as a storyteller and narrator for narrative nonfiction. Sometimes it helps if your aperture is a little smaller. My publisher really wanted to be able to, when you're selling the book, this says a little bit about the publishing industry, wanted to really be able to say, from the gold rush to the 1960s when the author's parents came to America. That's an important part of selling the book. But I'm glad that we in the end that we did it, because that is the arc. So in 1943, not because of some reckoning with our egalitarian values, but because of geopolitical reasons, China and the United States were allies in the war against Japan. There were millions of Chinese who were dying, and it was awkward that Chinese immigrants were not allowed into the country. And so the Chinese exclusion was officially repealed, but they only allowed this kind of negligible numbers, like 105 were allowed into the country. There were other ways around that quota, but essentially that was the quota, and that persisted until 1965, the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which repealed these quotas, the quota system that governed our immigration. The thing that's really important to know about that, though, is the proponents of the law were able to get it passed because they kind of had a misunderstanding about how the law would work, because it prioritized people with special skills, and so that was one route in, and the other route was it prioritized family reunification. And they kind of had this idea that, we have a certain kind of ratio of population, and so therefore they're all going to bring their families, and so our population will roughly remain the same. And when Lyndon Johnson signed the law at Ellis Island, he said this is not a revolutionary law. He wanted to assure Americans that the demographics of the country were not going to change significantly. They misunderstand. They had like a math problem where they just didn't understand the power of family reunification. It can happen exponentially. And so that's what happened, and it's only when you understand that there was almost an accident of history that I'm here, that many people here are here, that it's really helpful for understanding why we're struggling with our immigration situation in this current moment.
Yeah, from beginning of Chinese to rush to American, to have the gold rush, to the point 2016, the incident happened to you. You want to start this book? You know, it's been almost over 100, more than 100 years.
Yeah.
And you know, as elite reporter, still were that go back to your country.
Yeah. I mean, the story, for folks who aren't aware, I've told this story on the front page of the New York Times, and also many different venues. But yes, it was the fall of 2016. Trump was about to be elected. You felt like this kind of curtain of nativism that was descending on the country. A group of us, my family and some other friends, were on the Upper East Side looking for a place to eat for lunch. We were blocking the sidewalk. We were all Asian. A well-dressed white woman brushed past us, and she, muttered, "Go back to China" to us. And I was shocked that she said this. She looked like she could be a parent in my daughter's preschool. I abandoned my younger daughter, who was in her stroller, and I ran after this woman. Did not reflect well on me and my character, and I kind of got in her face, and I was kind of going back and forth with her, just like basically, I remember it was like along the lines of, "Are you serious? Did you really just say that?" And then she screams down the block, like in broad daylight, in front of all these people, "Go back to your effing country." And I wrote this piece, a quick piece, that was an open letter to her, where I wrote about this kind of feeling of otherizing that is common for Asian Americans. And I wrote about this kind of sadness that I felt as I was walking home that day, wondering if my kids, who are 2 generations removed from my parents' immigrant experience, if they would ever feel like they truly belonged in this country.
Yes.
And so that was the kind of seed for the book. I didn't end up, writing it until 2021, but that moment was kind of the birth, the origin story.
So my question is, almost a decade later, 2025, after finish this great book, knowing so many Chinese history in America, if same thing happened to you, someone say this again to you, will you respond differently? Will you still feel very hurt?
Well, now I would run home and get my book and hand it to her. I don't know. I mean, I've had incidents like this happen to me since then, not many, and I don't know. I guess I thought in that moment, there are so many things I wished I had said, like that. Oh yeah, I left out that part of the story. She yelled, "Go back to your effing country," and I yelled, "I was born in this country." It was so pathetic, and I was like just kicking myself afterwards that I couldn't have come up with a better comeback. I don't know what I would say to her. I was like, "Did you know that a Supreme Court justice called us strangers in the land?" Said we have been dealing with this history. I mean, one thing I'll say, the epigraph to the book is a line from a novel called Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. And I don't know if folks have read this book. It's won the National Book Award in 2020, and it's this odd imaginary conceit where it's about a TV show called Black and White, about a black cop and a white cop, and the narrator is generic Asian man, and his greatest aspiration in life is to rise up in this show and be kung fu guy. And he has this kind of soliloquy, kind of like this courtroom scene where he's kind of litigating his case, and he says, "Who gets to be an American? What does an American look like?"
What's
that's
your answer to that?
Right. Well,
that's
that's my answer to that is the book. But he goes on to say, like, why do we keep falling out of the story, even though we've been here, nearly 200 years? And so that's what I would say to the woman. Did you know that we keep falling out of the story?
Yeah, you were born here. You went to Harvard, and you worked for the most prestigious publication, New York Times, for 30 years. And now you are the exec editor of the New Yorker. Do you feel a strong sense of belonging to this society?
So I think that the answer to that relates to the fact that two things can be true at once, and we have to be able to hold on to that. Like I've given talks. I just remember in San Francisco, a friend of mine put together this kind of private event with some of the most powerful Asian Americans in Silicon Valley, and it was just kind of like this very high-powered event. Clearly Asian Americans have been able to climb to become CEOs, become U.S. senators, become executive editor at the New Yorker. But at the same time, that feeling of otherness remains, and there is. I like to use the word precarity. I think there is a precarity to the Asian American experience, and it just takes the pandemic was a particular moment. It was a particular moment that was just very jarring for us. We'd never experienced something like this. China is more powerful than ever. It's a geopolitical rival. Really at this moment, both parties are kind of taking turns seeing who can be more bellicose about China. And whenever I see that, I feel that kind of rising sense of fear.
Yeah. Do you think I have one boy and one girl, and you have two daughters? Do you think our kids still need to fit into this society?
So I think my kids are fortunate that they grow up in New York, and there's diversity. There's a certain diversity in New York, and it's been interesting for me because they've one of the great privileges of doing this book at this when they're this age is they're able to come to my events and hear me tell my stories, and they're able to think about this history and I mean, I don't know. I think what history tells us is that this precarity will persist. Obviously we have certain advantages. We have, one of the biggest things. Chinese arrived at the same time and grew in great numbers around the same time as the Irish. And there's a famous book called "How the Irish Became White," and because the Irish were really discriminated against. They were Catholic in their faith, and but the fact that they were able to become naturalized American citizens and access the ballot box was a huge difference, and that was not available to the Chinese. So I think political power is part of it, and all of that will, obviously numbers, numbers are part of it, and so all of that will make a difference.
I would think in a democratic country, the power, was dependent on the voters. So if you're a minority, even though Asian American right now has 24.8 million, roughly 7.5% of U.S. population, but still a minority.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe the sheer number will, if every Chinese Asian women have 2 or 3 children,
I mean,
and then it will help in the future. If we have more people, more, we have more voters. Our voice will be louder.
I think
it's
so.
It's just one aspect.
I mean, I really struggle to answer this question about the future and what would make a difference, and it's something that we could. Speculate about and discuss afterwards as we're mingling. There's a guy a guy named Yao King, who is he works in finance. He's been very generous to Asian American causes, and he hosted a book event for me, and he was part of the Gold Open of Crazy Rich Asians, where wealthy benefactors, Asian American benefactors, bought out, movie theaters, trying to show the market power of Asian Americans. And we had coffee, and we were talking about, his goals, which are very intentional around representation, and he has this theory, I'm just throwing it out there, that it would take one person who is provides utility to, most of America, meaning like an actor or like an NBA player, not who lasts longer than Insanity, and like somebody who has that level of visibility and kind of market power. He says it'll take one. That's his theory.
Maybe like Mao, Jensen Huang, Mao, Michael Law.
Yeah, I mean, Jensen
that
Huang's
helps.
not enough, I don't think.
But more of them.
Yeah, but the thing about it is it's actually very hard if you try to think of that through that lens. That we don't have anybody who is at that level. Not even close, I think. Maybe Simu Liu, who was Canadian, but I don't know. It's like it really is still. We still have a ways to go.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be a long journey, and I really think it depends on everyone, to work very hard on every occasion, on every possible way, to make our case will not befuel the other.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's open to the question. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. Yeah, for sure.
I have one just about what were the kinds of people that you interview?
Hi, just wondering what types of people you interviewed for the book. Like, did you ever interview like generations of a family that's maybe been here for years? And did you talk to people in like different sects of the country, like the Midwest versus the coast? Because I feel like the coast versus, like Chicago or Michigan might have a different.
Yeah. So. The vast majority of the book is based on primary documents in the archives. I did interview some and talk to some families. One just example is Connie Young Yu, is a well-known kind of community historian who is a railroad Chinese whose family goes back 5 generations, and she has some of her ancestors appear in different parts of the book, and I have their stories, because of the archives, but also through her oral histories. I originally wanted the book to be a little bit like The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, which is about the Great Migration. When I pitched the book, that's how I pitched the book. I quickly found out that was going to be impossible, because Isabel Wilkerson interviewed like more than 1,000 people who remembered the Great Migration. My history goes back a lot further, and when oral histories are very powerful, and collections of oral histories. Connie actually has been very helpful in the oral histories of railroad descendants, but when you know what you know about your great grandfather 5 generations ago, you might know like 4 facts, like literally, like that's how like sparse it is, and so like strategically there are in some cases there were stories as they connected to the overall narrative that I dropped in, that I got from descendants. One just additional sort of anecdote, the excerpt of the book is the Rock Springs chapter about Rock Springs, Wyoming, and I did additional reporting for that piece that's not in the book, because I wanted to bring it to present day, and so I set it. The opening section is about this archaeological dig that's been happening in Rock Springs to unearth the massacre. And the archaeologist Laura Ng, who's from Grinnell College, she's actually done some incredible work tracking down descendants of survivors of the massacre. And I ended up ending the piece with kind of this, these descendants of one of the, I think the last worker Chinese worker Chinese miner in Rock Springs to working for the Union Pacific, and the just really moving part of it is that this man had saved had written down his story, but had never shared it with anybody, like the story of his family. And Laura interviewed him, and she's like, "How come you haven't told this to anybody?" He's like, "I didn't think anybody would be interested." And actually, I think there's somebody here tonight, Arvin, I think, who is, I think that's your uncle, I think. Yeah, so it's pretty incredible. I just met him. He introduced himself, but that family also has kind of strands that ended up in New York. And so anyway, so that was an incredible find that's in the excerpt in the New Yorker. So.
Hi, my name is Winnie Pan. Trump gave a speech at the UN Assembly where he criticized European countries for their immigration policy and calling them irrigant help, right? How do you think the continued attack by the government against immigrations will change the globalization trend, and how would that affect our lives here? I know it's a big question.
Yeah,
I'm
big
just
question.
really concerned.
I had Trump's speech on mute on CNN. I work at the New Yorker, and so I have a TV next to me. But it was, and then I was just getting Slack messages alerting me that it was very unhinged. But it was honestly painful that I just didn't want to turn it on. I don't know. That's a really hard question, because the populist movements. This is outside my area of expertise. Populist movements have taken over and been successful, around the world, in Europe and the United States. The most popular politician in the UK right now is Nigel Farage, and clearly there is. We're in sort of a moment that relates to economic upheaval and just broader forces, I think, that contribute to this uncertainty and this desire to scapegoat immigrants. And I think it's impossible. Like we know for the story of the Chinese, is that it's impossible to block, people who are determined to better their lives, and we can hire. It was during Chinese immigration that the immigration apparatus that exists today was built, and it didn't stop the Chinese from coming. We're experiencing the levels of migration are far greater at this moment. Like, I think maybe it was a New York Times graphic illustration that was using cell phone data that kind of could trace migration, and all of the arrows are pointing to the United States, and it's an extraordinary thing. But I just know that the sheer determination to improve the lives, your life, and the lives of your family, is just very hard to block.
Yeah. This lady. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Michael. I have two questions.
Can you just one, because we have so many people want
Can
to
you hear
ask
me?
questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi,
just
Michael.
one.
I have two questions. First one is, I'm also working on a documentary on Chinatown with the Mayor's Office of Media Entertainment. And I'd say in the process of research, I've learned so much about how Chinese in our 200 plus years in America have actually fought back. We've been very defiant in, you point out the Wong Kim Ark, the 6 companies have had hundreds of cases brought up to the Supreme Court. Afterwards, we've had activist movements like the evacuating the basement workshop, tons of things that have been done with the community. And so part of this process has made me very proud of being Chinese American or understanding my identity differently. So I'd like to understand your journey as well as you've written this book, as your research, and how it has affected the people around you, as I'm sure you've talked about it with people around you all the time, like I do all the time. So that's my first question about your journey. The second question is, in today's political environment, and I'm sure, and I know a lot of Chinese people voted for the current administration because they thought maybe they'll be paying lower taxes. Those other immigrants, right? We didn't see ourselves allied with them. Those other immigrants are taking our money. So part of that, and also in seeing that in Texas, there is the bill that passed that Chinese cannot buy homes, right? The H-1B is directed towards immigrants, and 30% of the people who are affected by the H-1B are Chinese. 20-something% are by Indians, and the rest are Vietnamese and other. So with all this going on, what can we do now, right? Not necessarily in the future. What can we do now as a group, as an individual, to really be a bit more proactive, knowing that we do have this history. We are able to be more defiant and to fight. What are some of the things? So those are my two questions.
These impossible questions. So in terms of my own journey, I mean, it's interesting because this history, you can argue, is actually not my history because like this was, you know, as I mentioned, I came, my parents were born in mainland China, Hunan province, went to Taiwan when the communists came, and then they came to the United States for graduate school, and I'm part of that post-1965 story. This migration is overwhelmingly from southeastern China, from Guangdong province. You know, they speak Cantonese or other dialects that I do not speak. When you look back in the history books, you see these men in these queues, and they feel like other, honestly. You know, and so I think there was a part of me that didn't really see this as my story, but the more that I immersed myself in the archives, the more connected I felt to it because I just really related to their stories, and so that's a big part of how it affected my journey. In terms of your question about what can we do right now, you know, like I think actually, because I think you're also referencing how a lot of Asian Americans voted for Trump, and I think there is I think understanding history is a big part of it, because like when you understand this history and then you also I mean, this story is inextricable from what was happening in the late 19th century. Indigenous people were being driven off their land and exterminated. The Reconstruction, this was a time when Reconstruction was being vanquished. The Chinese question was part of that period, and it's inextricably woven together. You know, and also, you know, understanding history, you understand, you know, things like, you know, how the Black Americans and what they bled for and won in the Civil Rights Movement is very connected to, you know, the rights that we enjoy today. I think that like history builds empathy. Understanding history builds empathy, and so I don't know if that's a very scalable solution in a fast amount of time that it's going to take to before the midterm elections or the next presidential election. But I do believe that history and the stories that we tell about ourselves and our country are really important in this movement.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for this. I have hopefully two quick and easier questions. One is...
Everyone, we just give one question. So many people want a question. Yeah.
Okay. Is it going to be translated into Chinese? And if not, why?
Yeah. I would love it to be translated in Chinese. So the way it works is like just because you're interested in, I've gotten so many emails from people, I'd like to translate it, and the way it works though is a publisher in China or Taiwan would, need to purchase the Chinese language rights. Doubleday, my publisher, has the North American rights, and so. I have an agent, and he has a part of his office that works with foreign publishers. I don't really know how this works. It sounds like it's actually like you just mass email, Chinese publishers, and so for whatever reason, maybe we're not going about it correctly. I haven't. There hasn't been anybody that I've heard from yet that has purchased the foreign rights. I've heard of, I think my book came out around the same time as a biography of Jensen Huang, and Stephen Witt, who's the author. I saw he was doing a big tour in Taiwan. And I was talking to my parents about this, and I was like, how come he, got his book translated? And they were just, kind of scoffing at me. They're like, Jensen Huang is like a hero in Taiwan. No one wants to read your book, in Taiwan. And so I don't know. I actually think that people in China would be interested in the book, and people in Taiwan
people here, too, in the U.S. I'm thinking, my family that doesn't speak English or read English, I would love for them to read this book.
Yes. I would love for them too.
Great.
I mean, I've gotten master's people can I translate your book for a master's thesis? But it's not. I can't let them do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, I teach international business at Pace University, and I have a lot of Asian Americans, students from Asia. But one of the more impressive books I've read is by Evan Osnos, who works at the New Yorker and who lived in China.
Yeah.
And I'm a subscriber to the New Yorker, and I keep wanting to read articles by Evan Osnos about China. And I say this in the context of international. China is extremely important now, particularly in terms of green energy. What they're doing and their technology. And why isn't the New Yorker taking advantage of Evan Osnos?
Well, first of all, so Evan is a good friend of mine, one of my best friends at the New Yorker. He's we were in the same class at Harvard together. So I'll tell him afterwards that you said this. He lives in Washington, D.C. at this point, and has gone back and done stories in China. After he was based there, Peter Hessler obviously wrote stories from China for the New Yorker. He then moved.
Peter Hessler was here in February.
Yeah, he had a book. Yeah, he had a book came out. That's great. He now lives in Colorado. Yuqing Feng, who is in New York, but she would go back. The thing about it is so we don't actually currently have someone who regularly writes for the New Yorker from China. One of the reasons is it's really hard to get a journalist visa in China at this point. The New York Times, I think their correspondents are still reporting from Hong Kong and Taipei, and I'm friends with a guy named Jonathan Chang, who's the Wall Street Journal's Beijing bureau chief, and he's lucky that he has a visa, and we have some freelancers that we have worked with. Whenever I get a pitch from a freelancer in China, I have to be very careful in how we handle that, because if they report on something, for example, I think there's endless appetite right now for stories about AI in China, for example. Culturally, what they're doing, how it's transforming that country, how it's being used. But that's highly sensitive reporting, and you could risk getting a freelancer sent to jail, and it's risky at this point in reporting in China.
Yeah, this.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for the talk today. I learned a lot about Chinese history in the 19th century I didn't know about, but my question is more on like the present moment. I think being Chinese American right now is to live in a multitude of paradoxes. It's right, the experience of being reviled and your personal story of a white lady telling you to go back to China. But at the same time, it's like being lauded, right? The insanity moment, Crazy Rich Asians, being the model minority and going to all of these like exalted, prestigious places like Harvard, New York Times. So what do you think, like, what are the limits and the conditions of belonging when it comes to meritocracy, that Asian, like the Chinese excellence? How much of that is predicated? How much does it feel like to belong? How much of it is predicated on like being in proximity to whiteness? And what are the limits of assimilation to belonging?
Why do I keep getting all the hard questions? Yeah, like basically you're asking about what compromises you might have to make. I mean, I guess I just kind of go back to. I don't know. I guess I don't think my everyone's story is unique and particular, and I think about maybe just I'm just thinking about my own personal journey, and I remember when I started at the LA Times, I was in this minority editorial training program called MEPRO, and we got, so we were in the newsroom, and then we got these kind of classes that kind of prepared us to be full-time newspaper reporters. And one of the things that was really emphasized was how to navigate the newsroom. And it was really important to show your face, cultivate, masthead and the leadership in the newsroom. And, I just remember, I just did like silly things that I just like now in retrospect, like, I don't know, I feel like chagrined or whatever, like, but I played soccer. And so I just remember the head of the program, he had a son who played soccer, so I played soccer with his son, and there was a lot of resentment of me, for that, and I think in retrospect about how blind I was. So I don't know. Like the thing about it is like I feel like I have done. I do a good job of. I did a good job of navigating the newsroom. At the same time, I will say that that I have always felt that they're in newsrooms just like any other social organization, whether it's a school or a company. I felt an in-group and an out-group. And I never felt in the in-group, even as ostensibly the assignments I got or the jobs that I held. Did I ever feel that I had to conform to a certain thing? I don't personally feel like I did. I will say that I am I'm mostly these days a boss, and I manage by consensus. I'm not I don't like to tell people what to do, and I look for compromise. I look for and I think that relates to just I think a little bit relates to my journalistic curiosity, that I'm able to kind of step outside and sort of see multiple sides of an argument, and I don't run hot on a lot of, I'm not very strident in my opinions. Maybe that makes me a bad opinion columnist, but it makes me a good manager. And so maybe that's the answer to your question. I can't say whether or not that I've had to compromise. I don't think I have, but I do recognize in me a kind of personality that seeks consensus.
Thank you, Michael, for your presentation and your book. I just want to give you a little background on my history. I'm one of those early Chinese that came from the South. My grandfather claimed that he was an American citizen based on the fact that there was the San Francisco earthquake that destroyed the fires. I don't know if you had that in your book.
Yeah.
But I want to focus on a particular part of American history, the sliver of time that was after the American Civil War, and I believe there was a Ambassador Burlingame.
Oh, yeah, Anson Burlingame.
The Anson that tried to build a different relationship with China after the Second Opium War. Mm-hmm. And could you go over that particular history? Because I know Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, actually visited China. I don't know if he did it after he was president, but what was the attempt of U.S. foreign policy at the time that was different from, let's say?
Well, it was after Grant visited China after he was president. The Burlingame is famous, and it's in the book because of, he was a minister to China, and then he was about to, end his term, and then or his kind of stint as minister, and actually Chinese officials said to him, approached him at I think it was a dinner, and said, will you represent us? Like, will you be our, bridge to the West? And it was, they asked him to come and kind of empowered him to come to the United States and as their minister plenipotentiary. And so in 1868, it was a very big deal when the Burlingame sort of delegation arrived in San Francisco and then traveled across the country to Washington, D.C., and they negotiated this treaty that the most important thing for the book was that both countries affirmed the right of kind of free passage between the countries, and this is actually. What was a lot of the resistance in the kind of executive branch to Congress's kind of clamoring in the late 1870s to pass restrictions on Chinese immigration, because that it would violate the Burlingame Treaty and kind of be this diplomatic problem. And like the Burlingame Treaty came about because there was a very, kind of elite constituency that wanted to open the East and saw this kind of great opportunity economically and also spiritually. There was this kind of a desire to evangelize China, and so this was a period when China was it was a period of humiliation for China. It was incredibly weak, and so it was very. They were negotiating from a place of weakness, and so you see, one of the great things that you can get from the archives is these kind of diplomatic letters. And they were trying to understand this American justice system. How could it be that like these people are killed and no one's held accountable? And you see these very plaintive, in very kind of flowery language, these letters from Chinese ministers to the State Department, complaining and trying to get answers. But yeah, the story of Anson Burlingame is fascinating.
Now we have time for the last question. Yeah, this lady.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Hi, Michael. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the journalistic process of writing this book, like what it was like kind of building the relationships and building your knowledge base to do the research and to write it.
Yeah, so I don't know if this isn't probably exactly what you're asking about, but I never took time off to write this book, so I wrote, so that's its own story. But like so I worked from 5:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. And on weekends on this book, but I really benefited. Because this was during the pandemic, and so in the when I signed the contract for the book in the summer of 2021, we were all still working remotely. My kids were going to school remotely, so we moved to San Francisco for a bit, and so that I could take some vacation and also go to the archives in the afternoon. The heart of this research was drawn from all these archives at Berkeley, at the Ethnic Studies Library, all these historical societies that are in these mining towns on the West Coast, also the Huntington Library in Los Angeles, and at the National Archives in San Bruno. So I basically went to these places, took a point-and-shoot camera and just photographed boxes of documents, and then converted those into PDFs. And then there are many other archives that I drew on from across the country. I'm the first, I think, writer of this history to have benefited from the leaps in digitization. And so many records now, newspapers, other archives are online. During the pandemic, a lot of universities, University of Washington is a great example because there are a lot of archives relating to the Tacoma and the Seattle driving out. They put them online, or you could just write to them and they would send you for a certain, if you paid them a certain amount of money, they would just send you scans of these documents. The way I worked is there was so much history that I was covering that I just basically mostly worked one chapter at a time. So like if I'm doing I kind of mapped out, I knew I roughly wanted to cover these events. I was looking for an arc where there was kind of this emotional peak of the book with the driving out, and then I wanted the kind of what happened after to feel a little bit like an epilogue of the kind of the tension has kind of ebbed, and there's kind of a resolution, and so I would work one episode at a time, and so I would put together these chronologies, drawing from all my documents, where I would kind of just every time when I sat down, I had this chronology in Evernote that had all of the, like, if it was basically went from days to hours to minutes chronologies. And then in terms of the relationships, one thing I'll mention is I was very conscious to seek out advice from the historians who have come before me. I made sure that May Nye read a draft, Erica Lee read sections of the book, Beth Lou Williams read sections of the book, Gordon Chang read the draft, and to be honest, I do think that to a certain extent, I was the most nervous about how my relationship with historians. I think they look at me and I'm like a journalist and like, what is this guy doing? And I tout. I'm just so grateful for the work that they have done, and it was in my acknowledgments of the book. I list many of their works that were really instructive and vital in shaping my understanding and pointing me to archives. So that was the process. I can't believe I did it.
Wow, great. Let's give Mac another round of applause. Thank you so much. Now everyone buy Michael's book, and he will give you a signature.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.